Well, thank you. We're now live. Just before we start the program, thank you for visiting, being here with us at Encarados and Spanish Public Radio. Before we start everything, I'm just going to share the link with my guests so they can also share it, and then we'll get started right away. And it is. Well, first of all, thank you for being with us here at Encarados and Spanish Public Radio. I have three awesome guests. Consul General of Canada in Miami, Susan Harper, Consul General of Mexico, Jonathan Chait, and Gregory, Boan, immigration lawyer. And we're going to be talking about different issues that are happening with these three countries, US, Mexico, and Canada, due to COVID-19. But before we get started, thank you for being with us here at the program. But I would like you guys to present yourselves and tell us a little bit more about yourself. Probably more like personal side, where you grew up, where you come from, how you got involved in what you're doing right now, and your role. So that way, our followers who are looking at the program or who will watch it later get to know our guests. But we want it to be a little bit more personal. So we'll start with Susan.
Well, gracias, Enrique. Merci beaucoup. A pleasure to be with you today. A little background. Well, I have been in this business for quite a while. This is my second posting to the United States, although the last one was in Washington, which some people consider on a completely different plane from the rest of the country. También tuve 4 años en Buenos Aires y 3 años en Montevideo, el último como embajadora. Entonces, tengo un poco de español con un acento en combinación de porteño y Toronto, que es un poco especial. So thank you for not burdening your listeners with that accent. My career has been in trade primarily, although obviously as a head of mission, I have a lot of opportunity to see many issues, including, of course, in the US security and defense, because that's an important part of our relationship. But being in trade at the moment keeps me quite busy because that is so much of what is going on in the relationship. Although I find when we talk about trade, we talk about now trade and security, health and security, food and security. So we see the files coming together. But most of all, I think it's quite obvious, and this is true for me and for my friend Jonathan, we have so many people coming from our respective countries because of the bonds, not just of the economies, but of friendship and being neighbors, that we have a lot to do here, and it's all very interesting. So that's my background.
Thank you. Consul Jonathan, you're next.
Bueno, antes que nada, muchas gracias por la invitación, Enrique. Muy agradecido y contento de estar aquí participando. Also very happy to be together with these two special guests and be in your program. Well, I'm a career diplomat. I've been working also a few years already for the foreign ministry, more than 20 years. I was born in Mexico City. I'm Chilango, no, born and raised in Mexico City. And I've been posted pretty much in the US. Actually, I was posted in, started my career in El Paso, right at the border, which has its own characteristics. Then San Francisco, Dallas, went back to Mexico. And before being appointed as Consul General of Mexico in Miami, I was posted in Washington, D.C. as liaison with the Congress for 4 years, which, as Susan was mentioning, it's another type of role. Being in Washington, D.C. was a great opportunity as well for me. And well, now in Miami for a year, very, very, very excited to be representing Mexico in this city. There's so much to do. There are so many opportunities between Mexico, Florida, but also considering the USMCA, that I'm sure we're going to be working together with Canada in many other fields, including Florida and the US, of course.
Thank you very much. And Gregory.
Thank you, Enrique, and thank you to my esteemed panelists. I am very honored to be sitting on this panel with you, on this chat with you. And my own story, I'm, as Enrique said, an immigration attorney. I am Miami born and raised, Florida grown. My education was at Florida State, Nova, in Broward, and I stayed in Florida because growing up in Miami, especially being of Cuban descent, you grow up with the stories of other immigrants and other immigrant families. And it was always something that was a part of my upbringing. And working here, going to school here, you run into the good and the bad of being an immigrant or a non-immigrant. And it spoke to me that this was something that if I wanted to leave a mark on this world, it would be helping others achieve status here. And it's been quite a ride, but it's been a wonderful journey. And it's taken me to great opportunities like this conversation.
Well, thanks all of you for introducing yourselves. And I'm going to start with the first question. This is mostly directed to Susan and Jonathan. The COVID-19 pandemic has changed the relationships between countries around the world. Limiting travel between countries was one of those decisions. How has this made an impact with the relations that you see within your countries and throughout the world?
Shall I go first?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, obviously, this is a question that is very much on people's minds. I think, as always, we come to this situation in a context. And the context was that we had been at the negotiating table for 3 years. So we had a lot of time to develop relationships that were particularly, I would say, close. So when other issues came up, we were better placed to manage them together. And so I think that the fact that we all want to protect our citizens, but we all have the reality of needing our economies as well to keep motoring along, because that also is important to our citizens. Trying to work these elements out has been quite important. And I think that the relationships that had been built through, frankly, what were quite tough negotiations, meant that when we had to talk about other tough issues, we were much better placed than we would have been otherwise. And I think the fact that, for example, the Prime Minister just announced that the Canada-US border would be closed for another month. But when we say closed, what we're saying is essential people can continue to cross. And we do include in that the transport of goods that contribute to the supply chains in our interdependent economies. You know, we see that we are all working together to both protect our citizens and also continue that economic relationship, which is so interdependent, to continue to grow. And I think that kind of relationship, understanding of shared priorities, I think that cooperation is key to making this work. And so in a tough situation, we think it's been working fairly well.
Thank you.
Jonathan?
Well, I think I would agree with Susan. What is very important, like she was explaining, that any of these decisions is just taken by the countries themselves. I mean, we decide together. And even if the border were closed, it's very important to mention that we're not closed in the sense that no one can pass and trade cannot be going from one side to the other. This is something that is acknowledged by the countries themselves, and in a way that supply chains, like as Susan was explaining, is still going on. And it's just everything that is essential is still going on. So We need to continue with trade. We need to continue having people coming back and forward based on the reality that we are living right now. So this is how it's been handling in a very cooperative way and in a way that it's not disturbing the essential relationship between the countries, particularly what it means to trade, because at the end of it, that is what it gives also the development and the opportunities for the people to keep working. And I think this is what it's very important always to keep it in mind, how these decisions are made. And this is a reality that we have to be adjusting, particularly for Mexico. We kept also people coming in, particularly Mexican people. As you probably know, there's a lot of people that have to be repatriated from around the world. More than 14,000 Mexicans have to be repatriated for other countries. So as it happened in other countries as well, but this is an activity that is still taking place. So this is why it's important for us to keep this relationship with different countries, particularly in this period that are complicated, how to keep this flow of people coming in now, particularly for people to get back to our country.
Thank you. And with this question, I would go to you, Gregory, because when the restrictions started due to COVID-19, a lot of non-US citizens or people who did not have an immigration status, a green card, were basically stranded here in the US, either because they were traveling or they were here with another type of visa. What are the main effects that these restrictions are having on this group of people? And we know, like, adjusting status, that once you come in, it's like 6 months, that's how long you can stay. But now it's been 6 months since all this started. So what is the situation and what can they do?
That's a great question, Enrique. So the largest effect that it's having, is uncertainty. That is the largest effect. There is uncertainty as to one's ability to freely enter or to have their visa or their green card processed in a timely fashion. While there are certain criteria that are allowed to travel, as Jonathan and Susan elaborated on, essential workers, essential travel, what is essential is defined by the government, and it's a work in progress with the various departments coordinating. But that case has to be proven at the port of entry or prior to even leaving your country. Speaking from my own experience with my clients, I've had individuals that run the gamut. I have green card holders that have been unable to travel from Europe. I also have individuals that are currently within the United States that were changing status from tourist visa, tourist status to another non-immigrant status, and they are not receiving a timely decision on that case. Another individual actually received word that their visa was no longer necessary because the shutdown. That person's work depended upon the economy being open, and because of the various shutdowns throughout the country, USCIS actually cited COVID-19 and the shutdown and denied it. So where once there was confidence and security in one's work being essential, there is now uncertainty. It's been replaced with the uncertain fact of whether or not that officer at the time of you entering or leaving your country or entering into the United States or deciding your case is actually going to see that your job or your travel is essential or that your green card should be issued. And then the last topic I'll bring up on this issue, on this question, is with regard to the adjustment of status. As you referenced, the 90-day rule. One cannot adjust status technically within 90 days of entering the US. So if you are not going to adjust status, you have to be proactive in making sure that you retain lawful status and you maintain lawful status. But with adjusting status, there was actually a pause. There was a pause. USCIS was cited in emails stating that there was a hold. And then just a few days ago, USCIS, again in an email, stated that it was going to resume the processing of adjustments of status. So that information wasn't readily known prior to it occurring, and then it was later revealed. So again, it just speaks to the uncertainty of it all. While there are rules set in place of who can adjust or change status or travel, they, in practice, are not quite as black and white.
So Gregory, with this uncertainty, so what can somebody who's, I would say it in more colloquial words, let's say they're in a limbo situation, what should a person or a family who is considered like limbo do? What would be like the steps that they have to do in order to be complying with rules and regulations?
Great question. They have to be proactive. You must be proactive. If you are uncertain of what is going to occur with your own status, with the status of a loved one, with your visa, with your application, your green card, you must be proactive and take steps to get informed on what your country is doing and what the terms of your visa are, as well as the ports of entry that you may or may not be traveling in and out of. Again, in practice, I've seen that the ability to enter has been on a country by country basis, of course, and then on a port of entry basis, depending on which airport you're flying into, what's going on with Customs and Border Protection at that port of entry. There are so many factors that are being taken into consideration. So if there's no one answer that can apply to everyone's situation. So the only thing I can recommend is that you are proactive to find out what is available to you. If you're going to travel from one country to stay there, to quarantine for 14 days so that you can then hop back into the United States, see if that's an option for you. See if the airport that you're flying into is going to allow you to enter, or the airport you're leaving from is going to actually allow you to leave. Check with the airlines, check with your consulate, and always check online for updated information on whatever is specific to your case.
And with this, I would go to Jonathan. What should Mexican citizens do if they find themselves in this situation? Is the consulate giving any advice or guiding them on what to do, like if they were in some way stranded here in the US?
Of course. I mean, like Gregory was saying, the first thing that they should do is to get in touch with the consulate, and this is our job. So of course, we start normal business as usual per se, 1st of June. I mean, but that means only according to the requirements that the city is asking us to do, just 25% from the fullest capacity. But before that, we were open. I mean, we were not having people coming to the consulate, but of course, there's always emergencies and situations like the one that you are asking, and also Gregory was explaining. So anyone who was in the situation, the first thing is getting in touch with us, and so we can try to help them to see what's this situation in general, regardless if this topic or anyone. Those who were stranded here, we were helping them just to see if it was something for a visa, if it was something for their passports, or something because health issues. So depending on, regardless of the situation, we were there and we are there. This is the part of the job that we need to be doing daily.
Okay, and I'm pretty sure that the Canadian consulate is doing something similar, Susan?
Well, that's right. Obviously, like everybody else, our office hours have been cut right back. But what we found, I mean, the reality of many of the Canadians who are visitors here is that many of them are snowbirds. So in March, when the Prime Minister welcomed Canadians to come home, many of them went home a little earlier than they had thought. partly because insurance also reacted to the COVID, and many of the policies were only given an extra 10 days to cover COVID. But now we found that we've been open 24/7 for consular assistance, we and our network, but face-to-face has not been required for that many of our Canadian citizens. When they need face-to-face assistance, we are open a couple of days a week by appointment, but a lot of their inquiries can be handled by phone and by email. So our consular section continues to be quite busy. And of course, we have the advantage that if the issue is being stranded here in the United States, well, Canadian citizens and permanent residents can always go home. And so they are not stranded here. But we did find, for example, that there were people who had complications because they had non-Canadian family members. Not surprising, given the makeup of Canada. And I think that's why there was a bit of an adjustment to the border situation on June 8th to help permit that kind of extra family element to come into the decision, because we're all trying to protect our people in the best way we know in this completely new situation. But we also recognize that we are intertwined, like the economies. And so I think that was a helpful change. And we have found that, yes, it is hard on people. For example, we have a lot of Canadians who own property in the US. And if you live near the Canadian border, there are a lot of Americans who have property in Canada. And that's not considered essential travel right now. So some people are trying to work out how to, and make sure that everything is fine for their property, where usually they just hop on a plane and zip over to the other country. Of course, you cannot do that right now. But I think most people understand that we're in a pandemic. There may be inconveniences, but we will do our best to assist. And we are working very hard to do that.
Thank you. And just another question that popped up right now that you're saying people having like properties, either Canadian citizens in the US or US citizens having property in Canada. The same goes for Mexico. And there was this travel and a lot within the border, not so much here in Miami, because I think we're like more like in a peninsula, but like in the border parts of the country, travel between families was something normal that happened several times a day. You would cross the border 1 or 2 times a day, either to buy groceries, to see a family member, to go to school, and vice versa. Right now, with the non-essential traveling allowed, how has this impacted this situation? More like, has there been anything peculiar that you have seen? More like, how have people been adjusting to this? I think this is more like an emotional part more than anything.
Well, should I? Well, from the Mexican side,
Yeah.
well, I think people are adjusting. This situation, like Susan was explaining, it's different. So in a way, I think everybody understands that it's a different situation and they have to be living up with it. And but again, I think what it's important that both sides, when I'm saying both sides, between borders and Mexico, US, and I'm sure Canada and the US, they cooperate on that. And there's a whole interaction to do it as a way to not interfere and to hurt particularly the economy. But of course, for people, there's not much interaction, as you know. I mean, you know the border, it's a constant going back and forward. But I mean, some areas, for instance, for education, people who go to school, for instance, many people, that's what they do. They allow to be cross to the other side. Some of them who have to go for medical reasons, they were allowed to do it. So those situations that people needed to go back and forward, they're still doing it. So, and again, what is also very important, that anything related to trade, it's still happening. So in a way, they try not to.
Close to the border context, we are indeed in very different times.
True. I want to go into talk a little bit about commerce, but before we do that, since Gregory, I would like to get your point of view, like on the different executive orders that have been passed recently, and if there have been any changes, so we know what the status of that is, and what effects is all this having.
Of course. Well, there has been no new executive order directly on the issue of immigration per se. The last, the more notable executive order that came out a little over almost 60 days ago, we're approaching the 60-day marker now this month of whether or not it's going to be extended. And that dealt with issuance of green cards. There are murmurings that another order may be issued, or that the current order may be extended to non-immigrant visas. But I'll take a step back and explain what exactly that is. Immigrant visas are those categories of visas that lead directly to a green card. Non-immigrant visas are not. The issue of non-immigrant visas is something that, again, from my experience with my clients, it has them on pins and needles because we don't know if within the next week or so there will be a quote unquote ban or a halt on processing them. And it's been something that, as both Jonathan and Susan have said, it's something that we're all trying to adjust to. And again, they can only be proactive. People can only be proactive in trying to find out whether or not their particular situation is going to be continued or it's going to be put on hold.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And with the issue of commerce and going back and forth between countries, what measures have been taken to lower the spread of COVID-19, but at the same time continue commerce between the three countries? Susan.
Well, you know, I must admit, we are very pleased, frankly, that the USMCA, which we call either the CUSMA or the ASEUM en français, and I believe Jonathan calls TMEC, we're very glad that this is coming into force July 1st. And because it recognizes that we actually have an important, interconnected, interdependent trading relationship. And as I mentioned earlier, that is hugely important to us. So the fact that essential workers and transportation links, including trucking, so truck drivers, are crossing the border. We actually, for example, at some of our borders locations, we have people who are health workers who live in one country and cross over every day to work in hospitals. These are clearly essential. And I think we all take the point that it's hard to know what essential means, but you certainly know that those people fit in within that definition. The fact that we are working hard to try to make things work, we're very aware. We're very aware, for example, agriculture. I was pleased to find out one time when we were talking to strawberry growers here, they've got their seedlings from Canada. We buy about 20% of Florida's agricultural exports because we have a very different seasonality. So it makes very good sense for us to be agricultural partners in both directions. And we are working on that. And I think there's been a lot of discussion about, frankly, seasonal workers are extremely important, but have huge challenges in the context of a COVID context. And so people are looking for solutions for that because it's been very difficult. I think here in Florida, where they've already had one season, in the COVID context, and we're getting into our big seasons. We are so interdependent, so we keep looking for these kinds of solutions. But again, the fact that we have the USMCA coming in, which will open certain other doors. We've maintained all the NAFTA visas, though the things that we've had under the NAFTA. We've continued all our NAFTA tariffs, which are quite low, and almost everything down to zero, a few new advantages. We are trying to make this work as well as we can. And frankly, there are some very progressive elements which help underrepresented groups too, to leap forward with the new USMCA as of July 1st. So we're trying on a practical level, we're trying on a policy level to find solutions because we know how important they are. And I think, Gregory, we had met, you, Jonathan, and I had met the first time when we were talking about USMCA. So I know that you're aware, as Jonathan and I are, about some of the implications of this.
Yes. Well, I think from what it's important also, and going back a bit at the way that we are working immediately, we put in place all these sanitation protocols. So all the countries, and again, I'm talking the three countries, and in respects to this border, but this is something very important. You cannot stop trade. You cannot stop essential products, for instance. So all the agencies are working on that. So protocols, sanitation has been implemented, and this is part of the daily chores that is happening now also at the border. So again, this is an example how we need to address this situation, but without affecting the supply chains between the countries.
And let me go to the next question that has to do with what are the actions that Canada or Mexico are taking to help non-Canadian citizens or non-Mexican citizens who might be affected by COVID-19 and are unable to leave either Canada or Mexico? Because in some way we're talking about what happens if they're in the US, but what happens if somebody from another country is in Mexico or if they're in Canada? What is the government doing in those situations? And I'm pretty sure both of you know pretty much.
Sure. Well, if I can start, we work on that too. I mean, there's a whole process. We know that it should be a quarantine for any person, and particularly for another country before traveling to its own country or to. So something that I'm very proud to say, I was actually able to work very closely with Susan and the Consular Corp here in Miami for the repatriations of passengers and crew members that were stranded actually in the cruises. So you need to follow the protocols. It takes time. It can be complex, but at the end of it, it's a very complicated situation too. So again, everything is based on the protocols, and everything is also based on working between the countries and helping each other to, if you can repatriate from one side to the other, there's a way of connecting and finding a way of helping people from other countries who are stranded or staying in your country, and some of them who actually, unfortunately, were infected by COVID. So it's a way, there are protocols to follow, and at the end of it, the whole idea is to help them to get back to their own countries.
Susan?
Yes, on our side, there are a number of things, but just to give you a few examples, fortunately for us, most of our visa services were already available online. So people can continue to apply online for temporary resident visas or ETAs or work permits or study permits. So that's already facilitated for people. Visitors can apply online, for example, for a visitor record to extend their stay in Canada. I know that in a few cases we have been granting permanent resident status by phone or Canadian citizenship via virtual citizenship ceremonies. And we are trying to accommodate some people who are just on the edge of changing their status. We've suspended removals to all other countries until further notice. And I won't go into a lot of detail, but obviously there are students who are in Canada who have restrictions on how long they can work and how long they can stay. And many of those issues have been addressed. And so if there's a student listening to this, they certainly should look up some of the areas where we are trying to be flexible, recognizing this is a difficult situation. And I think we're doing many specific areas, giving them special attention to try to help people caught in this situation.
What other cases are like the most common ones that your consulates are taking in right now? Like if people, Canadian citizen or somebody wanted to go to the Canadian consulate, what things can they go do, or what's the phone number that they can call? And the same for you, Jonathan, so that way they can know after somebody sees this program, and they'll probably say, hey, you know what, I saw this is what you should do.
Maybe I'll start by just saying the phone number of the consulate is 305-579-1600, 305-579-1600. And people can call that number 24/7 because we have a call center, which is continually available to, in one location or another, assist Canadians calling in. We have had face-to-face, we do not get a lot of requests because a lot of what we often do is passport. Well, people are not traveling at the moment. So we are way down on requests for passports, but there are still some people who need passports, and they are coming in with appointments. We've had requests for some of the other services. And for example, there are some Canadians who are eligible for financial assistance under the COVID-19 programs in Canada because they're Canadians, and we've been helping a few of those people deal with things. We have, like every country, I think, detainees in the prisons, and so we have been continually being in contact with them and trying to keep that connection going. And as we do all the time, at least, and again, that's an online service or a phone service. So we get those kind of cases. We've had a few with Canadians adopting American children, and they've been a bit more challenging because that involves new passports, etc. But new travel documents anyway, and we have been able to help them. So for me, that's been something fundamental that I've tried to keep an eye on throughout this. Are we feeling like there are Canadian citizens who are not being served because we are serving emergencies right now, but my consular team has said, really, we're able to handle almost any request that comes in right now, one way or another, which is fundamentally important to us.
Jonathan?
Well, pretty much it's a similar situation as we were talking before. This is our job, and it's our consular affairs situations, regardless how complicated it is, we should be available for anyone. So most of the main topics, for instance, how people are reaching to the consulate definitely are getting their documents, probably passports, and also, you know, all the matriculas or their ID that they need to do it here. And also what we call the protection department, the legal department. In our department, it's not only legal, it's anyone who may need assistance. And it's also available 24/7. And the number, it's a 305-979-1534. And yes, we have different situations, people who might need support, people who might need to travel to Mexico for an emergency. Also some situations who might be emergencies here, for instance, some people who unfortunately hasn't had an accident, for instance. So we have to be open to them via phone, and if they need to meet us, we do it as well. And of course, all the detention centers, we need to be in touch with them. This is also business as usual. We need to continue following with what is our daily chores at the consulate. So we are available to anyone who might need us, and those are the main topics that people are interested to get in touch with us.
Perfect. Just before I know you have other meetings, so I want to make this really quick. Gregory, also, if somebody's in a situation and they want to be proactive with their immigration status here in the US, how can they get in contact with you?
Of course, my personal cell phone is 786-444-8418. My email is info@geblegal.com. Myself, my firm GEB Global, and I know that both the Mexican and Canadian consulates, we all have a presence online. You can reach us, and I definitely follow them. Everyone is posting up-to-date information the best we can, as soon as we can. I, of course, am available by phone, text, email, or by social media, and I'm more than happy to answer or help anyone in being proactive to either maintain status or to shift into lawful status or protect a loved one that's abroad. Everyone out there that's watching this program, you should definitely stay online and check for information that things are changing on a daily basis as COVID levels rise and fall. So it's something that we are all conscious about, and I know that I am more than happy to share that information as soon as I have it, and to discuss anyone's more complex or intimate immigration questions.
So before we end, my two final questions is, I know Susan mentioned that July 1st, the USMEC, or depending on what language you're saying it, officially takes effect. So what are the benefits to this North American, Mexico, US, Canada? So I want to get your insights of all three, like really quick on this situation. And also final words from you after we go into this question.
Well, maybe I'll go first. As I mentioned, I think the first thing we have to be glad about is we kept so many of the good things that we had already established through NAFTA. Many of the NAFTA visas, the permits to cross the border, we didn't lose any of that, and we maintained the tariff levels at the minimal amounts, and often vast majority at zero. So already we had that. I think, as they say, we renewed this because when we created the NAFTA, Amazon was just a river. A lot of things have changed since then. And I think one of the things that I've already heard feedback from companies on is the digital chapter, telecommunications and data, and some of those elements are extremely important. And I'd also think, certainly for us, this was extremely important that there are issues like environmental protection and labor standards and indigenous rights that are now in the text. And for us, that progressive agenda, and there is also in the labor issues that are related to non-discrimination, there's gender, there are a lot of those issues that have now been addressed by the new text, because for us, it's really important that the benefits of globalization also are given to people who are often underrepresented in the economy. And so for us, those elements also have been extremely important in the new agreement. Last comments, because you said that as well. Quisiera agradecerles los tres caballeros para permitirme hablar en inglés en mi idioma, porque como se pueden saber, su inglés perfecto es mucho mejor que mi español. Entonces, gracias.
You have to do it in French.
Sans problème, avec l'accent de Toronto toujours.
Thank you, Susan. Jonathan.
Well, pretty much, I echo Susan's word. This is a huge opportunity. We're talking a new agreement. I should not even say new, but it's with 11 new chapters, 23 modernized chapters. So that it just shows how much the world has changed and how much opportunity we have here. And as well as she was mentioning, that those topics, for instance, labor, which for Mexico was also very important, also was a concern for the other two countries, but for Mexico was important. So those changes, and not, but having it also as part of the agreement is very, very important. Of course, environment and other small businesses, for instance, is part of the new
Yeah.
NAFTA of TEMEC or USMCA. So it has changed. And I think I should say as a region, it shows once again that, we will mention it more than once, Susan and I, is that we only trade between us, we produce as a region. So it's very different. And that gives us another capacity as North America. So I think this is going to be a huge opportunity for the region, and at the end of it, for the well-being of the people living in North America. And lastly, also, muchas gracias por la oportunidad. It's always a pleasure to be talking to guests, to you. I think it was a very fluid, a very interesting conversation, always an opportunity to learn from the others. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you, Jonathan. And lastly, Gregory.
Happy to be last. Following such great consummate professionals, I wanted to comment on that. I think that those who are viewing this can see that both the Mexican and Canadian consulates are open and transparent and available to the public and to their citizens and those non-citizens in other countries. This is something that is, again, echoing past sentiments and past statements, something that changes day to day, and something that we're all in together. And I think that this panel discussion is proof of that we are all, in fact, in this together, trying to collaborate. And I'm excited for the new NAFTA to come about, and really can't wait to see what good that will do for all three nations. And thank you, Enrique, again, for putting this together. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, I want to thank all three of you for helping me put together this special program of Encarados, or in Spanish Public Radio. Even though we did it in English, I think the whole point of Encarados is actually to do a bilingual program. So this was the first, almost, I would say 90% English. So thank you for being with me. And I also want to share with you an initiative that's called Molecular 95, that the point is to raise funds to produce N95 masks to donate them to hospitals. So the money that is donated, let's say from Canada, those masks would go directly to Canada. The money that is raised in Mexico, those masks would go to hospitals in Mexico. The money that's raised in the US will go to hospitals here in the US. They're going to be produced here in Miami. The goal is to donate 1 million masks. So it's $1.5 million that need to get donated so this project or this initiative works. So let's see if this works. I can't see it. No, huh? There it is.
There it is.
Yeah. So
Okay.
it's molecular95.org. So hay que sumarnos a molecular95.org. So it's basically for Mexico, Canada, US, and Puerto Rico. So thank you again for being part of this program of Encarados in Spanish Public Radio. And this program will be also posted on Facebook, so you can share it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank